So here at the chop saw, we are going to make 2 cuts into this board so that we can make the proper length cuts for the short side. So we're going to cut. To do that, I'm going to measure the distance from the blade over near a stop block, which is what this side piece is going to turn into. And if I can measure the distance between the stop block and the blade, I can make multiple repetitive cuts at the same length. To do that, I'm going to kind of start by clamping that down, and I'm going to lower the blade and lock it in place. Now I'm going to measure the distance between the blade and the stop block using my tape measure, and I know that that needs to be 5 1/2 inches. So you can see that from the blade I'm over here to 5, right, and 5 1/2. Right. So I've got my distance set from my stop block to the blade. It's 5 1/2 inches, which is the length of the short side piece. And I'm going to make a test cut with the scrap piece that I started with at the table saw. In this case, I'm going to hold this piece down near where the stop block is. I'm going to hold it against the stop block and up against the fence. I'm going to cut through the piece of wood, and when the blade is at its furthest bottom position, I'm going to let go of the trigger on the saw, let the blade stop, and then remove my workpiece. By waiting for the blade to stop, I ensure of the fact that I'm not going to move this piece and won't come in contact with the blade while it's still moving. I can now take this 5 1/2 inch piece, double check its length, and make my cuts. 5 1/2. It is the same length as my sample pieces. Let's set those aside, and I can make my cuts. And I've got my piece here. Now, one thing I want to caution everyone on is cutting from a square end. So you can see, if I hold the square up to the end of this board, you can see there's no gap between the bottom of the square and the piece of wood. That's telling me that that end is square. That is the end that I'm going to put next to the stop block to ensure that both ends of that piece are square. The other end has the paint on it. It looks square, but I wouldn't trust it. Okay, so find a square end and cut from that side. So I've got 2 side pieces. These are short side pieces, short side 1, short side 2, and the important thing to remember is that these pieces need to be identical. Right, so if I make these pieces flush on one end, I can look on the other side and they're also flush. Remember, if they are not identical, it's more important that they are the same than they are exactly 5 1/2 inches in length. So a little bit shorter is better than not being the same. Okay, moving on to our long sides. If I take my workpiece and I were to lay these 2 10-inch long side 1, long side 2 pieces end to end, make this end flush, you'll still see that I've got that 1/2 inch of overhang on the bottom piece. That's good. What I need to do now is adjust how I make these cuts. Now I will not be able to use the stop block technique on this saw because the table ends here. All right, I don't have the same depth from the blade to the stop block or to the clamp. So I'm going to actually take this workpiece out, and this time around I'm just going to measure and mark it out and cut it. To do that, I'm just going to utilize my tape measure and my square and my pencil. So I know this end is square, that's the end that I cut the short sides from. I'm going to go ahead and measure from this end 10 inches in length, and I'm going to mark it. From that mark, I am going to use my square to create a nice straight line across the face at 10 inches. Remember, I'm going to make sure that I cut with the blade on this side of the line. That would be my scrap side because I measured from this end. I'll take this to the chop saw. Utilizing my laser, I'm going to line up the laser with the line, making sure the blade is on the scrap side. I'm going to use my clamp to clamp this piece down, and I'm going to cut it. Always holding down the blade until it stops. If I take this out of the clamps, I now have a piece that is 10 inches long and has 2 square ends. I am going to lay both these pieces on top of one another. All right. I'm going to make sure these ends are flush. And this time I'm going to cut through both of them. Both of these ends are flush. Right. I'm going to clamp them down, and I'm going to double check the location of the blade in relation to the top pencil line. Right. So if you look here, I can see that I'm going to be cutting through a small portion of the top piece, and that's okay, and the bottom piece. There's my scrap. Take my 2 pieces, and my sample pieces. We can take a look at what we have here. So from that long board, I was able to cut all of the pieces that I needed. Let's go back to the bench. Okay, so as you can see, I've got sample pieces, long side 1, long side 2, short side 1, short side 2. I set those aside. I now can look at the pieces that I've just cut. I've got 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 3.5, 2 pieces that are 3.5 by 10, and both of my short side pieces are identical in length, and both of my long side pieces are identical in length. If I were to take my long side sample pieces, I can see that all 4 of those are identical in length, and the same for my short side pieces. Again, at this time, I would want to make sure that my name was on all of my pieces and that they were secured in my locker at the end of my class period. The next step for this process will be cutting the 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch rabbets in the ends of long side 1 and long side 2.